Oh, thank you so much. This is the first in-person presentation that I have given in a really long time. So it's very exciting to see so many real people. So yes, I work for Save the Scenic Santa Ritas. I've been working for them for about 4 months now. I am the world's most peripatetic speaker. So I was working for Defenders of Wildlife. I worked for them for about 10 years. It was my second go-round. I worked for Defenders years ago in Washington, D.C. And I was really heavily focused on jaguar recovery here, but also mining issues. In particular, I worked with PARA, the Patagonia Area Resource Alliance, who are desperately trying to stop mining in the Patagonias, where companies in the last several years, Australian company in this case, has put claims on over 200,000 acres. They basically blanketed the whole national forest with mining claims. Pretty much the same thing that's happened in the Santa Ritas. In that case, it's a Canadian company, Hudbay. Anyway, I left a job I was really comfortable in and a little bit bored because I'd done it a long time for a job which is now easily the most challenging job of my whole career. There is so much to learn. It's a wonderful organization with folks like you that care so much, that are volunteering so much time. I'm the only staff person, so we're all super, super busy. And George, as you were talking about volunteers, I was going, this sounds like my pitch. We need a van. We need next week, we're doing a highway cleanup at the Rosemont turnoff. We've adopted a mile there. So anyway, without further ado, make this what is really a horrendously depressing situation as upbeat as I possibly can.
Okay.
All right. We have 3,000 members. So many people care about the Santa Ritas. So many people have moved there, and upon moving there and buying their green vacation home, they suddenly discover they're like a mile or less from what could be a gigantic 1.5 mile across, half a mile deep pit. We were formed in 1996 to protect the Santa Ritas from bad mining practices. And one of the things, when I got into this, I was really shocked to find out that we are still ruled by the 1872 Mining Act, which was passed as part of opening up the West and made it extremely cheap for people to file claims and exploit those claims on public land. For instance, the amount that a company has to pay for an acre of public land when they file a claim on it is the same as it was in 1872, $5. And the 1872 Mining Act makes mining the highest preferred use on any public lands. So that means even if the Forest Service or the BLM or whoever the landowner is, the federal landowner, wants to say no, they generally find themselves going, well, it may be really important for recreation, it may be important for wildlife, but we can't say no to the mines because of the 1872 Mining Act. So they pretty much roll over. One of the interesting things about the Santa Ritas is that it's dear to my heart because it is where El Jefe lived for years. You know, and probably you guys have all seen the picture of El Jefe, or one of the pictures of him, the video of him walking down this stream bed there in the Santa Ritas. So my sort of humorous title for this talk is, why did El Jefe pack his bags for Mexico? And I'm going to come back to that. So, but it's actually not only his habitat, but it's critical habitat under the Endangered Species Act, but apparently that doesn't matter. And at this point I would get into, if I was still at Defenders of Wildlife, I would tell you about some of the holes in the Endangered Species Act, but I'll just sort of tell you one, which is Fish and Wildlife Service, even when there's critical habitat, which is defined as habitat that is essential for the recovery of the species, they still, what they do is they go, are there any other jaguars anywhere else in the world? There are, I believe. And let's see, so if we kill off all the jaguars in the United States, will there still be jaguars somewhere in the world? And the answer, of course, is yes. And so they go, well, so it's not essential for the survival of the species, therefore we'll let the mining company go forward. It's when I sort of grew up and started working in this field, I was really shocked to find out that the Endangered Species Act was interpreted that way, but it is. Next slide, please. So what they are trying to do is get all the permits in line so that they become attractive to be bought out, and also to do, they call it exploration drilling, to go down like half a mile or however deep to prove up that they have the ore there to be economically recoverable and make whoever buys them make a whole lot of money. Next. So I'm going to be talking about two things. I bet all of you have heard about Rosemont, because for a long time the plan that Augusta Resources had in Hud Bay was to develop it was called the Rosemont Project, or the Rosemont Mine, right here on the east side of the Santa Ritas. And incidentally, here, okay, I'm going to do a plug for volunteers. Here on Highway 83, right about there is where next Saturday we're going to do our highway cleanup. So if anybody wants to join us, you can get in touch with me. Copper World is an entirely new sort of phase of the project. I'm going to come back to explaining why there's a Rosemont and a Copper World. This is where all the valuable ore is. Here there's relatively little ore. It's only about 600 feet deep. But this is where they're going to start. And the reason they're going to start here is because they lost a court case that our organization and some others were involved in. They lost a court case last year. And then this is just to show you where Tucson is, of course. Next slide, please, George. So this is going to, when you click, it'll bring up some text. Yes, oh, isn't that great? Multimedia, I love it. So I had to put this in as sort of an irony, because in 2022, HUD Bay published this massive document, which is called their Preliminary Economic Assessment. And it says what they're going to do and how much money they're going to make and how much everything's going to cost and how much water they're going to use and all of this stuff. So this picture is the beautiful picture that is on the cover of their Preliminary Economic Assessment. So I just had to grab that to show it to you. Primarily they're going to be digging copper. Next please, George. The open pit's going to be more than a mile wide and about half a mile deep, and I'll show you a graphic of that in a little bit. Next one, George, please. And it's visible from scenic Highway 83. Right, the best view of all is right where we're going to do our cleanup on next Saturday. Next, please. So this map is a little bit old, but it shows what I want to show. So here's the, this is the ridge line, this dotted line. This is the Rosemont pit. This over here is what they call Copper World, and they've got several different potential pits where they're going to dig out. This is all, in green, is all Forest Service land. Next, please. And this is where it would lie. Someone took this on a really hazy day, I think, but this big disc here, that's where the pit would be. And this is sort of the view you get from the turnout there on Highway 83. And all of this would be filled with about 800 feet of mine tailings, toxic mine tailings, this whole valley, which when you're looking at it is really, really beautiful. And these mine tailings are toxic. They're full of all kinds of nasty heavy metals and lead and all kinds of bad stuff. Next, please. Thank you. And this is a artist rendering by Robert Gay, who's partner of the executive director at PARA, and he's a whiz with Photoshop. So this is the East Rosemont side, what that'll look like when that's dug out. There's your sort of mile and a half a mile deep. This doesn't really show the tailings, but here you've got the tailings on the west side in the Copper World area. Next, please. And just to show how, compared to Tucson, this is only the potential Rosemont side, and we just laid it over Tucson, so you can see it sort of runs from Glen Street down to near where I live, down to 22nd. Next, please. This is courtesy, this was put together several years ago by the Arizona Daily Star, and it shows, so there is a mountain, and there's the Tucson skyline, and that's the Rosemont pit. It's really, I mean, hard to believe, really. Okay, so we had this big win in May of 2022. First we had the district court said that they couldn't dump their tailings everywhere on the Forest Service land that they wanted to. And they appealed, and the Ninth Court of Appeals said the Forest Service can't do it. The deal is that under that, my favorite law, 1872 Mining Act, 1872 Mining Act says that if you have a claim and you got to have some place to put your tailings and some place to put your office building, and you don't want to put it on top of the ore where you have your claims because you want to dig there. So it gives them the right to have a certain amount of other public land that is intimately associated with their operations to dump stuff. But there's a limit on how much stuff. And the reason we sued was because the Forest Service told them that they could dump as much stuff anywhere they wanted. And like a lot of stuff, you saw that hole. That's a lot of stuff. And they were just going to dump it everywhere, dump it in the stream beds, in the ephemeral washes, just dump it everywhere. And so the court said, no, you can't do that. So they backed off temporarily. They say they're not going to appeal to the Supreme Court because they came up with another plan. So this is all like this giant chess match, right, in which you guys are all politically savvy and involved, right? So you're always trying to figure out, like, what are they going to do that we could do this? And they're doing the same thing. So they switched, and as a result, they switched to the west side. So in that preliminary economic assessment, they talk about what they're going to do, which is, and I'll show you a map in just a minute, but on the west side, they bought a whole lot of ranches. So essentially, the people that had bought ranches there, some of them had owned them for a really long time. Some were relatively recent people who just bought what they thought was going to be vacation land. And they basically were, it's like in The Godfather, they were given an offer they couldn't refuse, right? Like, all your neighbors are selling out, and we're going to take this, we're going to use their ranch to dump tailings, so you better sell too. So what's happened is there's like one holdout, but almost everybody has sold in the area where they want to dump. And so this last bullet here says that one of the things they want to do is get access to their private land by buying Arizona State Trust land. And the problem is some of the land that they bought, the private ranches where they want to dump stuff, and I'll show you a map, is disjunct. And so to get the tailings there, they got to go across some state land or some BLM land. And so HUD Bay has asked the state of Arizona to sell them some state trust land. And so one of the things we're doing right now is we're getting everyone we can to write letters to the governor saying, please do not sell this land to HUD Bay. As of 2022, when they were told they can't dump their tailings everywhere on the east side, they came up with this new plan. It runs for 44 years. The first few years, like the first, I think, 3 years, they're only going to be on the Copper World side, but then they're going to start the Rosemont side. Pretty soon, Copper World will run out of ore, and they'll just be digging the Rosemont side for the next 44 years, making that giant pit, where they will leave that giant pit, which will be filled at least halfway with poisonous water. And it will basically, water from all around will seep into that, and so people who have wells and so on will be out a lot. So here are these parcels. I used to have a boss that always said, he'd show these really complicated diagrams, he'd say, this is not to inform, but to impress. So hopefully I can make this a little bit clearer. So everything that's orangey browny is private land that HUD Bay has bought. They just bought, these were 3 ranches, they just bought them. We call this the F parcel for obvious reasons. These are sort of west side stuff over here. Rosemont is kind of down there. And so, so when they're developing over the next few years, the west side, the Copper World side, the question is, where do they dump the tailings? Well, they want to dump the tailings on this private land they bought in this private land here. There's a couple, and this here is the Santa Rita Experimental Range that's been run as a biological field station by the University of Arizona for many, many decades. And it's the preeminent long-term study site for the sort of natural ecosystems that we have in Arizona. So this is really precious, and they're going to be putting all these toxic mine tailings here if they can have their way. So far, we don't have the University of Arizona saying boo about it. Keep going.
That's a surprise.
And now this is like at least third hand, but I have been told that that their approach is to say, well, now we'll see how this natural ecosystem responds to mining activity. So Anyway, that's kind of sad. We're still trying to get to people higher up in the university. But so HUD Bay has asked the state to auction this and auction this. In theory, we could bid against HUD Bay, but I don't think we would probably win. The reason these are really key for them is that they've got to get their tailings from out of these pits up into these areas here. So one of the problems is this light tan here is BLM land. So if they go across BLM land with their tailings, that triggers NEPA because it's a federal property, and that triggers taking a look under NEPA at the endangered species. It would be a lot of regulatory hoops for them. So what they're trying to do is get a right-of-way from the experimental range, which is really state land, from here to here and jog over to here. And then they want to get from here to there, and this is state trust land, so they've asked the governor to auction this, and likewise this. So far it hasn't been approved, but so you see what I mean? It's a chess game. Like they want to move their pieces of those little blue squares. Next, please. So this is what they've done to the west side, the Copper World side, in about the last year and a half. So these are drill pads where they've been. Like each of these little blobs is a drill pad where they've been going down to try to show how much copper is there for their investors, and everything else is a spider web of connections. This up here is not HUD Bay. This is a different company just bought them, a Georgia company. This is the marble mine. It was Emery since Simbra. I'm saying it a little bit wrong. Anyway, that's the marble mine. So, and it's not clear if they really needed to do all this work to prove up the copper that's underground, or whether they thought part of their strategy is make it such a mess that all the neighbors and citizens will give up. But, so far the disturbance is all recoverable compared to when they actually start digging. Next, please. So, I promised you El Jefe. So here's a shot of El Jefe going down a little stream bed in the Santa Ritas a number of years ago, and he disappeared about probably 4 years ago, and everybody assumed he was dead because he's a fairly mature jaguar, and then he popped up in Mexico. So just this last year he was captured on a trail camera in Mexico, and they can tell by the spot patterns that it's exactly him. So why did he leave? He left because of this. Of course. Next, please. Okay. So there's lots and lots of bad stuff that happens. I'm going to come back and talk about just a couple of these. One is water. The effects on water are going to be devastating if this mine goes in. Air pollution, in particular, toxics blowing off of those tailing piles. And there's a lot of other fun stuff like trucks on the road. They're probably, or maybe they keep changing their plans, going to process this ore and produce millions of gallons of sulfuric acid, which they will then be trucking out on the public roads. And, of course, decrease in property values, I alluded to, loss of recreation. So, toxic mine tailings. This is Robert Gay again doing an artist rendition. This is where they're proposing to put the mine tailings from the Copper World west side. And this is aptly named Copper Ridge Elementary School, and there's a community right there that's less than half a mile away. Next, please. Groundwater. In some ways, the worst thing of all is groundwater issues. So state law, there was a groundwater protection law passed in 1980 in Arizona. At that time, this time too, the mining industry vehemently opposed. And the mining rules in Arizona like it does in Nevada, and they had the clout to keep any protection from being passed. So ultimately it was passed, but they are exempted. So unlike, say, a developer, they don't have to make any provision for recharging the groundwater or conservation or anything. They just use as much as they want. And so we took a look at their preliminary economic assessment, because they actually have numbers in there that if you look at them carefully, you can figure out how much water they're actually going to use, because they tell you how much ore they're going to process and how much gallons per ton of ore and so on. And it comes to 4.3 billion gallons per year, which is enough for 41,000 households. And at current value of water in our area, that's a subsidy worth $313 million that this Canadian company gets from all of us. Next, please. So this is a really sad thing. Have you guys heard about this Sept decision? And came out just like, yeah, I see some nodding. Supreme Court decision, and it said that the Clean Water Act no longer pertains to, I don't want to say all, but almost all wetlands and almost all ephemeral streams. So in the Southwest, that's the majority of streams. So any streams that normally flow just during the monsoon season, there's no protection at all. Next slide, please. And this is HUD Bay at work. Here's a pretty big ephemeral wash. And that's a bulldozer there just happily wreaking havoc. And so the Santa Ritas are really important for recharging the Santa Cruz River. A lot of water reaches it directly, although what's going to happen to this water now is, I don't know if we'll get there. A lot of it gets to the Santa Cruz on the surface. A lot of it gets there as groundwater, recharging the groundwater. But there is zero protection right now for anything that they do to these washes. And of course, they're critical for wildlife as well. Next, please. So a big thing that HUD Bay always says is they're going to tremendously benefit the local economy because there's going to be all these jobs. And we just pulled together a few figures. Projected jobs represent less than 0.3% of total employment in Kima and Santa Cruz counties. And wages and salaries would be about 0.1% of total wages and salary in the two counties. So it's not going to be this massive influx of economic benefit, and of course it's relatively short term. And our organization has just commissioned an economic study to take a look at the effects of, essentially the mine is going to have a lot of negative effects, right, on net recreation, on tourism, on housing values, on all of these things, which of course don't get, like HUD Bay doesn't put those out in their PR. It's just, we'll have a certain number of jobs. And of course there's also a question about how many of those jobs go to local folks and how many go to, people from out of the area that have certain expertise that they need. So I was going to say, it doesn't take a high-level economist to know that this probably has a negative effect on the economy compared to next pretty picture. So, this, people can recreate there. People like to have their homes near there. People like to look at that. But that's not how it will look if the mine goes in. Last picture is to say, we're not alone. There's a lot of organizations that are opposed to this. Pima County and the city of Tucson, just in the last couple months, passed yet another in a series of resolutions opposing measures that benefit the mine. We've been involved with Tohono O'odham and other tribes. The Yaqui, for example, and a lot of other organizations, say the Scenic Santa Rita, Center for Biological Diversity, Defenders of Wildlife, and so on. So, and we're working in, one thing I didn't put in the slides, but I don't know if you guys have heard, it's a little obscure, but there's a law that two Democratic senators in Nevada introduced, and it's co-sponsored by Sinema. And it's called the Cortez-Masto bill. And I don't know, have you guys heard about this?
What's it called again?
Cortez-Masto. It's a Senate bill. There's a House bill also, but this is arguably the worst, most dangerous piece of anti-environmental legislation that I've seen in my career, if it passes. It's a specific response to that court case in which they were told they can't, Rosemont was told they can't dump their stuff anywhere they want on any public lands. And so this legislation would say that any mining company gets to take any public land they want for any purpose that is connected with their mining. So they'll be able to take any land that they want to dump their tailings, any place they want to put their buildings, anywhere they want to build a road, anywhere they want to do anything. That's what this bill would do. But still, it hasn't come out of committee. You know, and this is something you guys could do, and I could work with you, George, or anyone to give you the information you need and some dummy letters, templates to work from. But we need as many letters as we can to Senator Kelly, because he has not taken a position. And we're desperate for him to oppose it.